You've probably wondered why people with brilliant minds and extraordinary visions often end up losing their passion for life, isolating themselves from the world, or abandoning their deepest dreams. Why the most creative, insightful, and potentially transformative individuals seem to burn out faster than anyone else. Why those who started with the brightest inner fire often end up feeling the most disconnected, disillusioned, and emotionally exhausted. If you're an INFJ, INFP, INTJ, or INTP, you might be living this reality right now. Maybe you remember a time when you felt electric with possibility, when your mind was constantly generating ideas, when you believed you could change the world, or at least make a meaningful dent in it. But somewhere along the way, that fire started to dim. The ideas still come, but they feel heavier somehow. The passion is still there, but it's buried under layers of fatigue, disappointment, or a strange kind of existential numbness. Carl Jung not only recognized this pattern, he spent years studying why it happens specifically to these types and what it reveals about the deeper structure of human consciousness. What he discovered isn't just about personality differences or career burnout. It's about a fundamental conflict between how these types are designed to function psychologically and how the world demands they operate. Jung realized that INFJ, INFP, INTJ, and INTP types are what he called carriers of future consciousness. They're naturally tuned into potentials, possibilities, and visions that haven't yet manifested in the world. Their psyche is oriented toward what could be rather than what is. Their energy comes from connecting with meaning, purpose, and authentic expression rather than external rewards or social validation. But here's the tragic irony Jung identified. The very world that desperately needs their gifts is structured in ways that systematically drain their energy and discourage their natural functioning. They're like deep-sea creatures forced to live in shallow water, slowly suffocating in an environment that can't sustain their psychological needs. Think about the typical workplace, educational system, or social structure. It rewards quick thinking over deep thinking, immediate results over long-term vision, networking over authentic connection, efficiency over meaning, conformity over innovation. For sensing and extroverted types, this environment can be energizing, but for introverted intuitives, it's like trying to run a computer program on the wrong operating system. Jung discovered that these types have what he called a different energy economy than other psychological types. Where extroverts gain energy from external stimulation and interaction, introverted intuitives gain energy from inner exploration, meaningful work, and authentic self-expression. Where sensing types are energized by concrete tasks and immediate feedback, intuitive types are energized by possibilities, patterns, and long-term potential. But most environments don't accommodate this different energy economy. Instead, they demand that everyone function according to extroverted sensing preferences. Be social, be quick, be practical, be immediately productive. For introverted intuitives, this is like being asked to speak a foreign language all day, every day, without ever being allowed to return to their native tongue. The result is what Jung called psychological exhaustion, but it's deeper than regular tiredness. It's a kind of soul fatigue that comes from chronically operating against your natural psychological grain. Your body might not be tired, but your psyche is running on empty because it's not getting the kind of input and expression it needs to regenerate. This is why you might feel most alive during those rare moments when you're completely absorbed in something meaningful, when you're exploring ideas that fascinate you, when you're creating something that expresses your authentic vision. In those moments, you're operating according to your natural psychological design, and your energy returns almost miraculously. But then you have to return to the regular world, with its demands for small talk, its focus on immediate results, its lack of appreciation for depth and complexity, and slowly, inevitably, that fire starts to dim again. Jung identified several specific ways this energy drain manifests differently in each type. The INFJ starts to feel overwhelmed by others' emotions and needs, gradually becoming more isolated and cynical about human nature. The INFP begins to feel like their values and ideals are naive or impossible, leading to a kind of resigned sadness about the state of the world. The INTJ becomes frustrated with inefficiency and short-sighted thinking, eventually withdrawing into intellectual isolation where their visions can't be contaminated by practical limitations. The INTP gets lost in endless analysis and theoretical exploration, struggling to translate their insights into forms that others can understand or use. But Jung realized that this isn't just individual pathology. It's a systemic problem that reveals something crucial about how human consciousness is evolving. These types aren't failing to adapt to the current world. They're psychologically oriented toward a future world that doesn't yet exist, and their burnout is actually a signal that our current systems are inadequate for supporting higher levels of human consciousness. This is why the solutions that work for other types often don't work for introverted intuitives. You can't just manage your time better, network more effectively, or think more positively. You need to understand that your psychological needs are fundamentally different, and you need to create conditions that honor those needs rather than constantly fighting against them. Jung discovered that these types have what he called a transcendent function, the ability to bridge different levels of consciousness and create something new from the synthesis. But this function can only operate when they have sufficient psychological energy, when they're not constantly depleted by operating in environments that drain rather than sustain them. The transcendent function is what allows them to take their inner visions and translate them into forms that can benefit others. It's what enables them to create art, develop theories, design systems, or offer healing that genuinely advances human understanding and capability. But when their fire fades, this function goes dormant, and they lose access to their greatest gifts. This creates a tragic cycle. The world desperately needs what these types have to offer, but the world's current structure makes it nearly impossible for them to sustain the energy needed to offer it. They start with tremendous potential and passion, but gradually become depleted, discouraged, and disconnected from their purpose. But Jung didn't just identify the problem. He discovered specific ways these types can protect and restore their inner fire. He found that they need to understand their psychological architecture and create what he called containers for their energy, environments and practices that allow them to function according to their natural design, rather than constantly adapting to external demands. The first principle Jung identified is what he called energy sovereignty. Instead of trying to manage your energy within systems that drain it, you need to take conscious control of how and where you invest your psychological resources. This means making sometimes difficult choices about what environments, relationships, and activities you expose yourself to. For introverted intuitives, energy isn't just personal fuel. It's creative potential, the raw material from which insights, visions, and innovations emerge. When you're constantly depleted, you're not just tired. You're cut off from your source of inspiration and contribution. But before I share the specific techniques Jung developed for restoring and maintaining your inner fire, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because what I'm about to reveal in the second part of this exploration could be the difference between continuing to fade away and reclaiming the passion and purpose that originally drove you. Because Jung discovered that the fading fire isn't permanent. It's a signal that you need to make fundamental changes in how you approach your life and work. The very sensitivity that makes you vulnerable to burnout is also what makes you capable of detecting what your psyche truly needs to thrive. Jung found that these types, more than any others, have the capacity for what he called psychological regeneration. When they understand their energy patterns and create appropriate conditions, they can not only restore their fire, but make it burn brighter and more sustainably than ever before. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alive, most creative, most connected to your purpose. Jung would tell you that those weren't exceptional moments of inspiration. They were glimpses of how you're meant to function when your psychological needs are being met and your energy is being properly channeled. The problem isn't that you're not cut out for sustained creative work or meaningful contribution. The problem is that you've been trying to sustain it within systems and approaches that are fundamentally incompatible with your psychological design. Jung realized that introverted intuitives need what he called depth work, the opportunity to explore ideas, problems, or creative projects with the thoroughness and complexity their minds naturally crave. Shallow, fragmented work doesn't just bore them, it actively drains their energy because it provides no psychological nutrition. They also need what he called meaning coherence, the sense that their daily activities connect to larger purposes and values that matter to them personally. Without this connection, even successful work feels empty and depleting because it's not feeding their deeper psychological needs, and they need what Jung called creative autonomy, sufficient freedom to approach problems and projects in ways that align with their natural thinking processes, rather than being forced into standardized methods that feel foreign and inefficient. When these needs aren't met, the fire doesn't just dim. It goes underground, where it can turn into depression, anxiety, or a kind of chronic dissatisfaction that no external success can resolve. But when these needs are honored, something remarkable happens. The fire doesn't just return, it becomes a sustainable source of energy that can fuel years or even decades of meaningful work. Jung discovered that these types often go through what he called a necessary crisis, a period where the mismatch between their psychological needs and their life circumstances becomes so pronounced that they're forced to make fundamental changes. This crisis isn't a failure or breakdown. It's their psyche's way of demanding that they create conditions that can actually sustain their gifts. The tragedy is that many people interpret this crisis as evidence that they're not cut out for ambitious goals or meaningful work. They scale back their dreams, accept circumstances that drain them, or convince themselves that their psychological needs are unrealistic luxuries rather than essential requirements for their optimal functioning. But Jung would tell you that this crisis is actually an opportunity. It's your psyche's way of refusing to settle for a life that doesn't honor your deepest nature. It's calling you toward a way of living and working that can actually sustain and nurture your inner fire rather than constantly threatening to extinguish it. Now I want to share with you the most transformative discovery Jung made about restoring and maintaining the inner fire of introverted intuitive types. Something that goes far beyond typical advice about work-life balance or stress management. Something that addresses the fundamental psychological architecture that determines whether your fire burns bright or slowly dies out. Jung realized that the fading fire isn't actually about external circumstances, though they certainly play a role. It's about what he called the splitting of the psyche, the gradual disconnection between your authentic self and the persona you present to the world. When this split becomes too wide, your energy gets trapped in the gap, unavailable for the creative and meaningful work that actually feeds your soul. For introverted intuitives, this splitting happens more easily and more dramatically than for other types because there's often such a huge gap between their inner world of possibilities, insights and visions, and the external world's demand for immediate, practical, measurable results. You start compartmentalizing. There's the you that goes to work, handles responsibilities, and meets external expectations. And there's the you that has deep thoughts, creative visions, and authentic feelings about what really matters. Over time, these two selves become increasingly disconnected, and the energy that should flow between them gets stuck. Jung discovered that restoring your fire isn't about finding better external conditions, though that can help. It's about healing this internal split, reconnecting with your authentic psychological core, and learning to operate from that center even when external circumstances aren't ideal. The first technique Jung developed for this healing is what he called active imagination. But for these types, it becomes something more specific. It's about regularly returning to and engaging with your natural psychological processes, the kinds of thinking and exploration that energize you, regardless of whether they have immediate practical application. This means giving yourself permission to think deeply about things that fascinate you, to explore ideas just because they're interesting, to work on creative projects just because they express something authentic about your inner world. Not because they'll lead to career advancement or external recognition, but because they feed the part of your psyche that generates insight, passion, and purpose. For the INFJ, this might mean regularly engaging with psychological or spiritual material, exploring questions about human nature and potential, or working on projects that involve helping others navigate complex inner terrain. For the INFP, it might mean creative expression that explores values, emotions, and authentic human experiences, or activism that aligns with their deepest convictions about how the world should be. For the INTJ, this could involve strategic thinking about complex systems, long-term planning for meaningful goals, or theoretical work that explores how things could be improved or optimized. For the INTP, it might mean pure research or exploration of fascinating concepts, model building that helps explain complex phenomena, or philosophical investigation of interesting questions. The key insight Jung discovered is that this isn't recreational activity or hobby time. For these types, this kind of engagement is psychological nutrition, as essential for their well-being as food is for their body. Without it, they gradually starve psychologically, even if their external life looks successful. But Jung identified something even more crucial. He found that these types need what he called integration practices, ways of bringing insights from their natural psychological processes into practical application in the world. The fire doesn't just come from inner exploration, it comes from the dynamic flow between inner vision and outer expression. This is where many introverted intuitives get stuck. They either retreat entirely into their inner world, where their insights never get tested or shared, or they abandon their inner world entirely and try to function purely according to external demands. Both approaches lead to energy depletion and the eventual fading of their fire. Jung discovered that the transcendent function, the bridge between inner and outer worlds, requires conscious development. You need to learn specific skills for translating your insights into forms others can understand and use, for finding collaborators who can help implement your visions, for creating external structures that support rather than drain your natural functioning. For each type, this integration takes different forms. The INFJ needs to learn to communicate their insights about human potential in ways that inspire action rather than just understanding. They need to develop practical skills for creating healing environments and guiding others through transformation processes. The INFP needs to learn to translate their values and ideals into concrete projects and movements that can create real change in the world. They need to develop enough thinking function to create strategic plans for manifesting their vision rather than just feeling passionate about it. The INTJ needs to learn to collaborate effectively with others, to inspire and motivate people around their strategic visions rather than just analyzing systems intellectually. They need to develop enough feeling function to understand what motivates others and how to create buy-in for their ideas. The INTP needs to learn to package their insights and discoveries in forms that others can access and apply. They need to develop enough extroverted thinking to communicate complex ideas clearly and to follow through on practical implementation of their theoretical work. But Jung made another crucial discovery about maintaining the fire of these types. He found that they need what he called purpose coherence, a clear sense of how their individual gifts contribute to something larger than themselves. Without this connection to collective meaning, even successful creative work eventually feels empty and depleting. This is different from the meaning that other types might derive from family, community, or conventional success. Introverted intuitives need to feel that their work contributes to the evolution of human consciousness, the advancement of knowledge, the healing of collective wounds, or the creation of more authentic and sustainable ways of living. When they lose connection to this larger purpose, their individual projects feel meaningless, no matter how personally satisfying they might be in the moment. The fire needs to feel like it's part of something bigger, something that justifies the energy investment required to maintain it. Jung discovered that this purpose connection often gets damaged by what he called collective contamination, the gradual absorption of society's values and priorities that conflict with their deeper knowing about what really matters. They start evaluating their work according to external metrics like income, status, or social approval, rather than internal metrics like meaning, authenticity, and contribution to human flourishing. Restoring the fire requires what Jung called values clarification, the conscious process of distinguishing between authentic personal values and absorbed cultural expectations. This means getting clear about what actually matters to you at the deepest level. What kinds of contributions feel genuinely important? What vision of human potential or possibility genuinely inspires you? But Jung also identified something that many people miss about these types. He found that their fire is inherently sustainable when it's properly tended, but it requires what he called cyclical rather than linear engagement. Unlike other types who might maintain steady energy output over time, introverted intuitives naturally work in cycles of deep engagement, followed by periods of rest and integration. The problem comes when they try to force themselves into linear productivity patterns that ignore these natural cycles. They push through the integration phase, trying to maintain constant output, and eventually burn out completely. Or they feel guilty during the rest phase, interpreting it as laziness or lack of commitment rather than necessary psychological processing time. Jung discovered that honoring these cycles actually makes these types more productive and creative over time, not less. The rest and integration phases aren't lost time. They're when their unconscious processes the material they've been engaging with consciously, making new connections, generating insights, and preparing for the next cycle of deep engagement. This means learning to recognize and honor your natural rhythms rather than fighting against them. It means planning your work and commitments around these cycles rather than trying to maintain artificial consistency. It means trusting that the integration time is as important as the active work time, even when it doesn't produce immediately visible results. Jung also found that these types need what he called depth containers, relationships and environments that can hold and appreciate the full complexity of their inner world. Shallow connections and superficial environments don't just fail to nourish them, they actively drain energy by requiring constant translation and simplification of their natural psychological content. This might mean being more selective about relationships, choosing quality over quantity in social connections. It might mean creating or finding work environments that value depth, complexity, and long-term thinking over quick results and surface-level interaction. It might mean cultivating spiritual or philosophical communities that can engage with the kinds of questions and insights that matter to you. But perhaps most importantly, Jung discovered that maintaining the fire requires what he called authentic expression, the regular sharing of your genuine insights, visions, and creative work with others who can appreciate and benefit from them. The fire needs to flow outward, not just burn internally. This doesn't mean sharing everything with everyone. It means finding the right channels, audiences, and collaborators for your authentic expression. It means developing the courage to share your depth rather than hiding it, to offer your insights rather than keeping them private, to create from your authentic vision rather than what you think others want. Jung found that when introverted intuitives do this work of reconnecting with their psychological core, honoring their natural cycles, clarifying their authentic purpose, and creating appropriate channels for expression, something remarkable happens. The fire doesn't just return, it becomes more powerful and sustainable than it was originally. They discover that their apparent disadvantages in conventional systems are actually advantages in creating innovative, meaningful, and transformative work. Their sensitivity becomes a source of insight about what's needed. Their complexity becomes a tool for addressing multifaceted problems. Their depth becomes a wellspring of wisdom that can guide others through difficult transitions. And they realize that their fire was never supposed to be sustained within conventional frameworks. It was meant to create new frameworks, new possibilities, new ways of approaching the challenges and opportunities that face humanity. If you've recognized yourself in this exploration of why your fire fades and how to rekindle it, I want you to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications for more insights that can help you understand and work skillfully with your psychological design. Share this video with other introverted intuitives who might be struggling with their own fading fire. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we realize we're not alone in our struggles, that our challenges are part of a recognizable pattern that others have successfully navigated. And leave a comment sharing your own experience with your inner fire. What originally ignited your passion? When did you notice it starting to fade? What practices or changes have helped you reconnect with your authentic energy and purpose? Because Jung's ultimate message about the fading fire is this: it's not a permanent condition or a personal failure. It's a signal that you need to align your life more closely with your psychological truth. Your fire is still there, waiting to be rekindled by the right conditions, the right understanding, and the right commitment to honoring your deepest nature. Stop trying to sustain your fire within systems that are designed to extinguish it. Start creating the conditions that allow it to burn bright and sustainable, illuminating not just your own path, but lighting the way for others who share your vision of what's possible.